So just wanted to ask what would make this a great conversation for you?
Oh, well, well, I appreciate that you didn't send questions ahead of time because that sends me off into planning. So I mean, really, just having a natural conversation works fine. Yeah, I can't think of any guidance that's particular.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, congratulations on this book. I have to
Thank
just
you.
tell you, um, these books are brilliant in the way that they're set up, and you don't have to read the whole book to get going. You know, it's not intended to be like, okay, read cover to cover and now you're ready. It's
Right.
like, it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. Where did that idea come from?
Well, it came specifically from readers in that we had a book that came out in 2005. It was called the Emotional Intelligence Quick Book. And we were doing, when I say we, my co-author and I were doing executive coaching specifically for Morgan Stanley at the time. And emotional intelligence was kind of a really big topic. And we were brought in because people were given Dan Goleman's book to read, which is actually a really definitive type of work. I've read it, I've read his other pieces, but when you're a busy professional, these finance guys were flying in for a whole week on lots of different topics. And in the sessions, they would tell us, say, I was told to read that book as pre-work, but I couldn't get through the chapters on the brain on the airplane. And we thought, we need to come up with something. And then the second inspiration was at trade shows. We would be at trade shows talking about this topic with people, and they would come up and say, I read that quick book that you wrote, but tell me what I'm supposed to do. If I, was already good at it, I wouldn't need to know, but I need to know what to say and do. So we thought, okay, yeah, that book was a chapter book. We need to spell out specifically all the things people need to do. And then one other thing I would say that helped really drive this layout in the book is that we were sitting on all this data. So we could download the data, look at the scores of, and in this current book, teams that were rating themselves in the high 80s to low 90s. And then those that were saying to themselves in their scores that they're in the 40s, 50s range. What were they saying in the comments? What specifically were they saying and doing that made them a high team EQ kind of performance or a low team? So I think that when we got down to structuring the book, the voices that are in there represent people from all industries and professions. So I think that's why it sort of lands well. You can pick it up and get ideas and then go back and put them into practice and then pick it up again.
Wow. I think it's brilliant. Emotional Intelligence 2.0, the way that was set up was brilliant in my view. It just, again, because you're dealing with people of action, people who are busy. They just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And you're right about Goleman's book. I mean, it's so broad, and it deals with like education, and it deals with this. I mean, I read the book too, but it's like, it's just too much for some, a busy leader to get the best out of. So you guys it's just brilliant how that is laid out. And I think, more books for leaders and managers should be written this way. Just tell me what to do, for crying out loud.
Yeah. And it's interesting when we set out to do this particular book, Evan Watkins and I did some searching on Google for team books because we didn't really want to duplicate anything that was already out there. And wanted to just see over the last 10, 15 years what's been written about teams. And it was interesting to me to see how few books focus specifically on things that team members can try out with one another. There's quite a bit about what makes a team particularly successful, basketball teams, or moves right into team leaders. There are books for team leaders, and then it moves into leadership and how to guide teams in an organization. I thought for somebody sitting around the table who is a team member who wants to show up and be a better team member, is shockingly few titles.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here's your next book, by the way. So I had a client text me this morning and say, or actually yesterday, what book would you recommend for having one-on-ones, great one-on-ones? Well, I couldn't think of anything, and I looked on my shelf, and there are a lot of great conversation books and leadership, communication books, but nothing so narrow as like that on my shelf anyway. And I did a search. So I see, that seems smart too, that you're not duplicating things and you're finding something that really, has a niche.
Mm-hmm.
And it really has worked for you all in a marvelous way. Marvelous. So.
Well, we hope it gets in the hands of people who need it right in the moment.
Yes. Well, I do too. I would encourage, I can't think of anybody it doesn't apply to. Let me ask you, what got you interested in emotional intelligence to begin with?
Well, that was a really interesting moment in my career. I came out of the world of employee opinion surveys. I guess you'd call them employee engagement surveys. My training is I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, fancy word for just a lot of statistics courses. And I'll tell you, I had spent years going in, gathering data, feeding it back, making recommendations for organizations to implement, and not getting to really see what the organization actually did. I think you'd have to be working inside the organization to see that over years. And I went through a kind of existential crisis where I thought to myself, this doesn't feel like I'm making much of a difference. I'm sharing data only to see people say, thank you so much. We'll have to find something in here to implement. Simultaneously, I was teaching an evening class on adult development. And I asked my students to pick something related to something significant in an adult's life development from age 20 through to end of life and do a presentation on it. And for 2 or 3 years, there'd inevitably be a student in the class that would pick something related to emotional intelligence because it was surfacing. This was in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in the back of the class thinking to myself, wait a minute, this is a really simple interpersonal skills model. And because it's linked to how our brain is wired, I think this is the first time I've come across something that gives scientific credibility to soft skills. And my clients would totally get this. Like they would understand it. But it moved me out of helping organizations as sort of an entity to helping the individuals in the organization. And for some reason, for me, in my career, it brought meaning back to all of the day-to-day conversations and work that I was involved in. And I never looked back. It was from the early 2000s onward. And I think the niche that I found, and then subsequently the team we put in place, is that we were not the ones coming up with the ideas, but we stayed close to them. We would read the articles, the ones that had all the factor analysis or multiple regressions, but you go right to, well, but what was the conclusion? Did they find nothing, or was there something significant that someone should know about? And that's what we were tracking, and decided that our little gift for some reason was how to take that and just translate it for people into just day-to-day language.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how I stumbled onto emotional intelligence.
Right. Don't try to be too smart, right? Just try to be useful.
Yes, right.
And I hear this in you, this movement from organizations, from entities to something much more personal. So you started off thinking, you
Yes.
know, I want to do this for the big picture thing, but the real meaning and fulfillment came from making that personal identification, that we're thinking about individuals, not just big groups.
Yeah, there's a wonderful Cuban proverb that says, inside every head is a world. And in our work, that's what we find. I remember doing a session back east in Connecticut at DuPont, and a woman was there that they had flown people in from all of the Americas. There was a woman there from Brazil, and she came up to me at a break in the session, and she said, you know, she had taken a 360 assessment where all her staff and her peers had given her feedback, scores, and comments. And in the comments, her staff were telling her that they could never read her emotions, and that they had a difficulty understanding where she was coming from. And she pulled me aside privately because she said, you know, my staff aren't wrong. I don't know if I understand and recognize my own feelings. So here we have an executive at the, you know, peak of her career, and her action plan really is to just simply start naming feelings. It's
Yes.
right at the beginning of the work. You know, it's not telling someone that they have to be sophisticated in a nuanced negotiation situation. It's simply to say, what are you feeling right now? And you feel such compassion when someone steps forward like that. And yeah, so when you can make a change in that leader, they go back and really start doing some of the hard work, and you do start making a difference at the organizational level. So yeah, it has brought quite a bit of meaning to our work.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. And I recall now in the first book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, there is the naming kind of project.
Yes.
That, you know, just very simple. And I've heard the same thing. You know, I'm hard to read. My boss says I'm hard to read. My people say they can't figure out what I'm, you know, and we're not almost, we're trained, I think, in ways to like, don't let too much out, you know. And I was just with a group last week or a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling stories. So each of them told a negative story and a I shouldn't say negative, a painful story and a pleasurable story from, you know, that was formative in their experience. So there was a dozen people. So it took a while, and they all went around the room, and I was watching. And I was watching the people there were some who were very expressive, you know, and some who were telling these stories that are so, you know, filled with emotion, but yet you look at them. And it occurred, and I said to them, I said, you know, this is one of my things I would say, just to suggest to think about, and that is teach your face to show your heart. It's just, it's just like, it's okay, you know.
Yes, yes.
You know, it's like, if you're curious, if you're like, oh, that's, you know, whatever, you know, obviously you don't want to be angry or aggressive with someone and, you know, and turn them off, but you can still let your face say what's in your heart.
Yeah, it takes the guesswork out for everybody around you.
I'm working way too hard to figure you out, right? So speaking of compassion, what is this with survivors of torture? You're somehow involved in that organization.
Yes, I sit on the board of an organization that is welcoming newcomers to the US, and I'm in the San Diego area. And the statistics are there are around 35,000 people here, in most large cities around the US, that when they arrived in the US, they arrived from a situation where they had been tortured in their home country by either a government state actor or a non-government state actor, so some situation where it was unsafe. So the torture is in the past, typically for something that, you know, their family was connected to. Maybe somebody attended a church that was not embraced, or part of a political group that wasn't in currently in power, all kinds of things, gender. So they are now living in the US, but the torture in their past has shut them down in a way where they're experiencing what any type of severe trauma might experience, is depression or nightmares. Oftentimes there may be some recovering medical needs. So this organization provides the mental and medical care for these citizens so that they can come back to life as community contributors. And this is right down even to children in schools. We have families through the generations that is passed down the severe depression, or if they witnessed something. So that is the work that is done here and in most cities in the US, and I'm affiliated with those organizations.
Well, good for you. That seems like a wonderful thing. You mentioned something that there's a tendency when painful things happen for us to pull back and shut down.
Yes.
And I have this gut feeling that generally it's better to open up than it is to close down, when these things happen, or even at work when something goes awry. I think we have a tendency to hunker down, close the doors, get in the bunker, solve this situation, or all the leaderly things. I just have this gut feeling that it's so much better to open up. And I wonder what comes to mind for you when I say that, because I could be off base here.
Well, there's a couple really interesting things, and I'll end it maybe on a comment related to how this operates in teams, because when you said this, it sort of reminded me of an interesting piece of data. But let me start with that. I think the need to shut down is the fear that it'll flood, and once emotions start, you won't be able to stop them, and then you'll feel embarrassed, whether it's yelling or crying or whatever the case may be. But the more someone stuffs it down, the more likely it is to build and erupt later, and often at the least opportune time, right? So if you're able to communicate it in small bits for the purpose of understanding it, and for second of all, to communicate your needs, then it becomes more manageable, right? So that's obviously for the day-to-day scenarios at work. For someone who's experienced a fairly severe type of thing, they may want some guidance from a coach or a therapist. But for those of us who are at work, expressing how you feel is actually quite a contribution to the work at hand, if you can build the courage to learn how to do it constructively. So when I said I want to relate this to a team, one of the interesting findings in going into our database of all these teams that had taken our team assessment over the last 2 decades now, one of the most common complaints in the comments section is from team members who get an earful from another team member about a third team member.
Oh, yeah, good one.
And expressing these complaints privately, but not bringing them forward to the, originating person who, made them feel that way, and not bringing it forward to the group. So the people commenting on this are the listeners, the ones saying, I hear so-and-so complaining so much about this other person, but I wish they would just go to them and work it out. I'm so tired of hearing about it. Now, I think the person who's doing the complaining is seeking a release of the pressure of the difficult situation. So it feels good to complain. They're getting it out a little bit. The problem is they're getting it out of their system with the wrong person. Now they're doing what we call they're dumping negativity on someone else. And of course, as a teammate, you're going to be kind and say, okay, yeah, well, how's it going? Oh, tell me more about that. I'm so sorry. But when you receive it over and over, you walk around with that negativity now. So the thing that most team members are not skilled at is how to take it to the right source, because that's scary. Now you're taking difficult or challenging feelings to a person who might get mad at you or might get hurt and retreat, and you're not sure how to control the feelings, so you kind of avoid the situation. And that's an example of one of those more challenging scenarios for what it means to kind of operate with a higher team EQ. That listener of the complaining can do that a couple times, but eventually you have to sort of steer your coworker back to, it would be really great if you could talk with the person. They probably don't even know that you're feeling this way. So I don't know if that kind of jogs your mind of what you were thinking of when you thought, is it good to hold feelings in, or is it better to just sort of get them out and express them?
Well, I wanted to just kind of lay out a runway for you to explore that, and just see what came to mind. So it was a very broad question. A more specific question came to mind about venting versus expressing. I think there's some research about venting is not really, anger in particular. There's a lot of research on, hitting your pillow doesn't help. Sometimes it makes it worse, right? You vent some sort of venting thing. What comes to mind for you when you think about the contrast between venting and expressing?
Yes, I think venting sort of happens spontaneously. It builds, and whether you're doing it individually or as a group, it can serve a purpose if it's done briefly. Get it out of your system, but know that it's not really getting you to the next step. Expressing, in my view, is getting at this thing where in a relationship, there are these three needs that we believe must get met. You have to get your own needs met in a relationship. You have to meet the needs of the other person, but both of you have to meet the needs of the relationship. And if any one of those needs gets neglected for too long, it begins to become the source of either stagnation or conflict in the relationship. So this idea of expressing your feelings has a lot to do with getting your own needs met, being able to speak up and say, I need a little more time. I didn't even get my thought out because you jumped right in. That's expressing a need, but without maybe, attacking back at the other person who just interrupted you. So yeah, that's my view on expressing needs. Is a wonderful place, and we're not all skilled at it.
Or scary.
Even if we are skilled at it, we're not always good at using it in the best moments. Even ourselves who are in the world of leadership and emotional intelligence with our families, or on a bad day, we can all have these moments. None of us are perfect walking around,
It makes me think about this, I'm so glad you brought up this idea of I'm the boss and everybody comes to me with complaints about everybody else. And I send them back, but that it just seems like an unending process. And I'm sure there are many things involved in that. Even the leader's own view of themselves as maybe a compassionate, problem solver or whatever. There are a lot of things going on when people come to us all the time with issues. Yeah. Part of it is just the seat. I mean, you're in the seat, you're the boss.
Yeah, that's true.
But sending them back, which I believe in, it almost feels like, well, what needs to be in a person if I'm going to send somebody back to a fellow teammate and there's a complaint or whatever, what does the person who is going back to try to deal with their complaint directly, what needs to be in them? What do they need to bring to that conversation to help that work instead of the secondhand person?
Yeah, I think when they are speaking to the secondhand person, they get to be sort of undisciplined in what they're saying about what they're feeling. They get the freedom to almost craft it in the terms of this situation is only about me. They are entirely in the wrong and I'm entirely in the right. And there's some not only safety in that for them, but maybe a little fun. It's like, oh, it's all about me. But if they're sent back to talk with the other person, there's a possibility of how do you phrase what was frustrating to you. So there's fear going in is if I phrase it a certain way, is that person going to get defensive? Or is that person going to get mad at me? Or is that going to person decide they don't like me anymore? And it's that fear of the defensiveness that will encourage the person to avoid that conversation forever. But when you as the listener to the complaint reminds them that, so what if the person feels defensive? They're guarding something that's important to them. Maybe it's their pride, or they don't want to feel embarrassed, or whatever the case may be. But once they're allowed to feel that, you don't have to own it. You don't have to take their defensiveness and carry it around with you. Just let them feel defensive. And when someone realizes that, they realize, oh, yeah, that's right. That's their feeling. I have a choice. I don't have to absorb it. So that gives them a little bit of courage, maybe to experiment with a direct conversation, that they don't have to own what the other person's reaction is going to be. They probably will have to practice, though, what they're going to say, because they've already rehearsed the scenario where they're entirely in the right and the other person's entirely in the wrong. But they might want to sort of play around with, when you phrase it that way, how well do you think that person's going to receive it? Is there a way to phrase it in a way that they can kind of own it? And if you were to phrase it in a way that they're going to own it, how do those words sound compared to how you just said it? So there's an intermediary role that the listener of the complainer could play, and that is, the listener of the complainer could say, do you really wish this would go away? And the person's go, yeah, I wish they would stop it. So, well, probably a conversation with them is needed, but you're probably going to have to position it or phrase it a little bit differently than how you just said it to me. Do you want to try rephrasing it? And maybe it's not in that first conversation, but maybe the second or third complaining session, maybe they'll be ready to try it out with you as the listener. And then in a way, you're helping get them ready to go into this arena that they're fearful of, which is giving constructive feedback about something that's important to you, or to the person, that will help get their needs met, right? I mean, it could be as simple as saying, yeah, it feels like every time I'm in a meeting, you talk over me, and that tells me that you don't value what I have to say. Now, the other person might say, no, I didn't mean that at all. But they can't argue with how it made you feel, and figuring out how to say that so the person can sort of slow down and listen and maybe agree, that maybe you're right. Maybe I am doing that too much, but I want you to know it isn't because I think your ideas aren't important. Right. Oh, okay. Now you moved away from you moved one step forward into the scenario of learning about what it was like for the other person who's bothering you. You're learning a little bit new insights, what drives whatever it is that's bothering you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So helpful. Um, Instead of, I want to shift to the book itself. I mean, I would just like to keep talking on here for a while, but I also definitely want to give specific exposure to Team Intelligence 2.0. It's, like I said, awesome. The setup is awesome. It's so practical. I love what you said. The research about emotional intelligence gives this sense of validity. I think it's Goleman who talks about, the higher up in an organization you go, it's like these skills, emotional intelligence skills, are like 95% more important than the technical skills that you had when you started or something. I forget the exact, but he has these wonderful statistics that when leaders read them, they go, oh my word, I got to pay attention to this. Now you're answering that need. And this team intelligence, I think, has as much or more potential than team emotional intelligence. It has as much potential or more to have positive impact on organizations than the first book. What do you think would be different about teams if they took this book and started reading it and then started, practicing team emotional intelligence?
Yes, I think the first difference is you're not going it alone. Together, you as a group are realizing, hey, we don't all have to be at our very best every moment of every day. We're a group sitting around the table and we can stand in for one another, right? So if two individuals are, in the heat of a moment having a really good conversation, but it's starting to go awry, they're so in the moment that emotional intelligence as an individual skill almost thinks, you almost feel like you have to be delivering your words while observing yourself at the same time. It's a very nuanced, sophisticated skill to be able to be on it if you're in the heat of the moment. With team EQ skills, your teammates are absorbing what's happening in the moment, and someone else at the table can just speak up and say, hey, maybe we should call time for a second, because I don't think we've even stopped and absorbed what just got said, right? So the two people who are going at it, they don't have to be responsible for getting the most out of sort of this debate, or they don't have to be responsible for making sure it doesn't go awry or go on too long or hurt someone. The whole group is now responsible. And when there are more people aware and attending to it, you can play to each other's strengths. For example, there's a wonderful member of our team who has such positivity that if we're hoping for a moment to laugh, she's going to deliver every single time. So, spreading positivity is as important as dealing with a difficult moment. So at a team level, you're going to just have more resources to draw upon. And when everyone is aware of it and talking about it, they get to contribute their special magic to what makes this team perform well. So that's why I believe that there's something unique and different about team emotional intelligence than individual emotional intelligence. We use the analogy of basketball teams. You may have a team of superstars, but they're still not doing well as a team because they haven't figured out how to make sure that everybody is tuned in with one another and, volleying the ball correctly and at the right moment. And that's what this book does. It has this same set of a myriad of strategies. There are 53 in here, and there's an action plan for a team to work through. So I imagine a group getting this book, kind of doing what you said, skimming it, maybe not reading every page, but getting a lay of the land, but maybe working through the book group discussion questions at the back of the book to begin a conversation if they've never really had a topic like this before.
You reminded me, go ahead.
Well, tell me what it reminded you, but I want to circle back to a comment you made about the stats that Goleman made, but I don't want you to lose your thought. What was it? What did it remind you of?
Thank you. Just I think it's Google's research on their high functioning teams mentions this ability to notice when somebody is out of sorts or when there's a emotional heat or something like that, that's one of the top factors in high performing teams.
Yes, in fact, I think what was really interesting about their research is that they thought they might find this special formula to great team success. And what they found is there was no special formula, although those that were high performing seemed to have figured out how to set norms that worked for them. And there was no special set of norms. There were completely different norms in all of these high performing teams. So yeah, it's not a lot of fancy tools, right, that the team needs. When you open this book and you skim the strategies, you're going to find statements that sound like, oh yeah, I'm an adult, I've been a team player, I know how to do that, right? So these tools are already in your toolkit, but being disciplined as a team to access them in the right moment for the right reason, that's when it sometimes takes courage.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Knowing when, taking the time to figure out how your team operates under stress and how it gets the best of you as a group. Maybe you've never paused and actually had that conversation, but is it easy and doable? Yeah, it actually is. You just have to make sure you schedule the time to do it. Seeking outside perspective from someone outside the team, that's not hard to do, but do you remember to think of doing that? Oh, so that's really sort of what teams can do is remind yourselves all these strategies that other people are putting into play and pick the ones that are going to help you when you need them. Yeah.
Right. So you wanted to circle back on Goldman's statistics.
Oh yeah, I wanted to jog your memory of his statement and share with those who are listening why that makes sense. This idea that being able to be emotionally intelligent as a leader or as a working professional is more important than all of the expertise that you have from your profession. You think, well, that's kind of hard to believe, but it won't be when I share this, that we all go to school, right? And so if you've finished high school, there's sort of a level playing field of knowledge and things that we hit out of school. Then many of us go to college and we specialize in a major. And then we may even go to graduate school or additional training. You think about physicians, right? All of them have successfully made it through medical school and been able to become certified in their specialty area. So in a weird way, if you take pediatricians, there's been sort of this leveling of the field, right? They're all very competent. So what is going to make one stand out over another? What Goldman, I think, is really pointing out is it's the pediatrician who can really listen to the parents and to the child and glean more information from them during those short periods of time that they're interacting with them. And that will raise their ability to diagnose or put two and two together. So it's this adding on of this interpersonal skills. I think Goldman spoke about leaders who are in the field of science, right? The most brilliant scientists who aren't able to speak to funders may never get the resources they need to keep their lab open. So for those individuals who think, okay, I don't think there is a place for emotions at work or on a team, we just got to get the stuff done. Eventually these emotions circle back around and get in people's way. So might as well master their presence. Just get comfortable with the fact that feelings are going to be in the room. Don't be afraid of them. Start getting familiar with the ones that are your nemesis. and maybe just try a few things here and there to get a little bit better at dealing with that feeling that you hate to feel.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You made me think about, I just came back this morning from a follow-up visit with a doc, and I had a procedure here about 10 days ago, I guess, and this was or a week ago, and this was the follow-up call. And he is masterful. He is so brilliant when he deals with people. He first of all, he opens the door to this this bland room that everybody has to go to, right? He opens the door. He does not immediately rush in like he's in a hurry. He actually stood in the doorway.
Okay.
And he spoke to me. And he did that before on the first visit. He spoke to me. He talked. Then he moved in slowly. He talked to me. I'm starting to hear a strange echo in my ear. Are you hearing that?
No, I don't hear.
Okay, great. We won't worry about it then. So anyway, he's very happy to see me. He's like, do you remember what I said to you after the procedure? And I said, no. I said, yeah. He said, yeah, you were coming out of it. And he said, I just have to tell you, everything went so wonderfully. It was this, and your anatomy is great, and blah, 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 and this. And he's like, and I said to him, I said, look, even if you're lying, I'm glad I came in. And he said, no, I wouldn't lie to you. And he wouldn't. But it has been the best experience I have ever had in my whole life in the medical field. Now, one, he's good at what he does. Two, he just is wonderful with people.
Yeah, when you think about it, competence in your area is sort of the baseline, right? So the message of emotional intelligence isn't that it's more important than knowledge, but the message is it's equally important. And what you're sharing is a good example of, we hear from physicians all the time that procedures are one thing, but it's getting the patients to do all of the follow-on work after the fact, and to be honest about what they're really doing and not doing. And so to get a patient to admit, yeah, I'm only taking the pills 3 times a week, not 7, that could be embarrassing to admit, but the physician needs to find that out. And the only way you're going to get a patient to reveal that if you get them really feeling safe and able to kind of just own up to it. And that takes these interpersonal skills. Yeah.
Well, creating safe, obviously psychological safety has been a big thing too. Amy Edmondson and, her work with teams, psychological safety. I want to go down that path, but I see our time is just going away so quickly. So in the book, I'm going to ask that, what are these 4 skills that you have in the book? Just give us a quick overview, but then cross-functional teams generally don't perform well, right? They just are underperformers. So I think the context of cross-functional teams is really important. So first, give us the 4, kind of skill set that we're talking about.
Yeah, team emotion awareness is the first one. In fact, think of it as there's 2 sets of 2 skills. The first 2 are about emotions, and the second 2 are about relationships. So it's being aware of the emotions that surface in the group and what you do with them. So it's team emotion awareness. The second is the team's ability to manage those emotions well over time and in the moment. So team emotion management is the second one. And then centered around creating connections for the team is managing the relationships inside the boundary of the team, all the pairs and triads and the collective group. And that's whether you're sitting in a room together or over the phone or doing sort of the live chatting by email and other kinds of forms. And then there's the set of relationships that the team has with people outside the team and with other teams as a group. And those strategies include things like how well you're building bridges with those that have resources that you need. Others are how well are you even treating people as guests when they come to interact with your team. It's remarkable how we can overlook that, but it can do a world of good. So those are the 4 skills. Yeah.
All right. So let's think about the context of cross-functional teams. I know it's in the book and it's definitely true. They almost, if you were going to predict, you would tend to predict that they're going to underperform, because there's battling agendas and different personalities, and they don't all know each other that well, and you have to represent other people. It's just a very challenging arena. What are your suggestions for helping cross-functional teams really thrive?
Yeah, a cross-functional team, each person sitting at the table, they've already had this affiliation and identity as a team member of another team, right? They're plucked out and said, hey, can you represent, So in a weird way, to begin with, those team members are maybe eyeing each other as, I'm only kind of here temporarily, or I'm here, but not here in spirit. And I mean, think about it. Leadership teams are a cross-functional team because every person in the leadership team is leading another team. So where are their loyalties and their bonds? So I think raising that awareness for cross-functional teams is a big aha. Now they have a choice, and they can consider what they want to do to make the most of this cross-functional team experience. It's almost like being willing to begin the bonding and maybe norming phase, relook at what this cross-functional team is here to do and put your all into it. Because putting your all into operating as a good team member on a cross-functional team does not have to mean that you have abandoned your other team or you're disloyal to them. So that's one thing. And with cross-functional teams, they don't always meet as regularly as, say, the other kind of team. So I think with cross-functional teams having the opportunity to skim these strategies and have a chance to say, how are we defining and identifying this team? What is our mission together? And doing a little bit of that team work at the early stages would do a world of wonder. Because I think 6 months in, a year and a half in, it can acquire dysfunctions, and nobody on that team now feels like they've got permission to say, hey, can we stop and as a group figure out how we want to operate together? They almost feel like, okay, it's too late, that ship has passed, I'm not allowed to do it. But this book really does sort of open up that opportunity again. And anyone who picks it up and reads it can quietly start putting into practice any one of these strategies without telling anyone. And it may actually begin to shift momentum in a different way. Now, obviously, if you can speak about it openly and say, hey, I'd love to share some of these strategies and see which ones you guys would want to put in place, that's even better. But I don't think it's required. I think any one person in stealth mode can begin putting into practice some of the things that can change the dynamic.
I want to ask you about being genuine. So we learn skills and so what, it just starts to make me feel smarmy, because I have to, I'm gonna, practice listening skills. And so, but if I don't really care about people, what's the, you know what I mean? It's like, it feels manipulative.
Well, it is. And in fact, you won't get away with it. And the reason is these things, we mention them only briefly in the book, but there are these things called mirror neurons. They're right behind your eyes somewhere in your brain. And they're picking up micro expressions on your face. And this is how humans do zero in on someone who they think might be lying to them, or whatever the case may be. Now, we're not very good reads as to the intent behind the lie. In fact, we're very bad at it. We seem to think the worst case scenarios. Oh, that person didn't say hi to me in the hall because they don't like me or they don't value me. And in fact, that person just got bad news and they didn't even notice, right? But people do pick up on when you're not being genuine. I don't think you can go through the motions of pretending to care about your teammates if you truly don't, and get away with it. People.
There was this transition between teach your face to show your heart, for example. There's an assumption there that what's in the heart is good, that you do care about your team, your organization, your employees, you care about yourself, you have a caring heart. So teach your face to show what's in your heart. The problem is there is this time frame where I feel like a faker. It's like, okay, how am I feeling right now? Well, I'm feeling happy. Well, don't forget to smile then, because you've got your relaxed, your think face is your stink face, right? You don't really look that engaged. So I have to go,
Well, okay, let's talk about temperaments. So temperaments are a variety of things that we may be born with, right? Emotions and emotional intelligence are not an inborn trait. It's a skill you can develop. However, there's all kinds of temperaments and personalities, right? And then you have your upbringing. So personality and upbringing drive a lot. Like if your temperament is to be super, super calm, and it just takes a lot to rile you up, and you were in a family that sent you messages that it's not okay to express your feelings, and you sat at a very quiet dinner table all through your growing up years.
Probably not Italian.
Right, yeah, or vice versa. You're from a very animated, that you don't feel cared about until someone really does take you on in a big argument. That's how you feel respected, when someone is going to take you on in a verbal sparring conversation, that kind of thing. So, but those who feel as though that, like, I don't even know how to show it on my face, there's a little bit of variety in the temperaments we have. Imagine a person who's intense, just being able to use that word. You can kind of picture they're tightly wound, they're intense, they're focused. The way they show their facial expressions is going to be different than someone who's vivacious. And so, and so I think we have to allow for these varieties, and then within the specific variety of temperament that you display, those around you want to be able to see your version of a good day or a bad day. So if someone who's vivacious never reveals how he or she is having a bad day, now that person is kind of hiding a full range of their personhood from the people that are around them. So that when you say, we should show our heart on our face, it's like, show the full range of your own emotions. And the way to do this, if you're very subtle, just by nature, is to verbalize your personal handbook to other people. So let's just say you're someone who's tightly wound and you're not animated. You could say, if you see me sitting here quietly, it's because I can't even believe what I just heard, right? So now you're telling everybody, I'm shocked, but my version of shocked is very quiet and still. And that's okay. You might have to use words to prompt people on how to interpret what's going on with you.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for your time and for the book. I would recommend it to anybody who is in organizational life. So I think that's everybody on the planet who is doing something with organizations. It's, to me, it's as useful as the first book. And I know the first book was a huge value to millions of people. So thank you. I wish you well. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. Yep. I wish you well. How would you like, people to connect with you?
Well, our website, is that something that's helpful to readers?
Yep.
Is www.talentsmarteq.com.
Okay.
And there are a variety of ways to engage with us. And I believe there's even for reaching me or members of the team, I believe it's at TalentSmart.
Say that again, please.
Info at talentsmarteq.com.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
including getting messages to me. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn and
great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Take care.
Okay.